So, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Irina Khubiladze and I am president of Association of Political Psychologists of Ukraine. And it's a great pleasure for me to have all of you here today for this open talk on a topic of immense global importance: the global threat to democracy, autocratization, and war. And this event is organized by three organizations in cooperation: Association of Political Psychologists of Ukraine, Institute for Social and Political Psychology at the National Academy of Educational Sciences of Ukraine, Kiev School of Economics. And we are honored to host such a timely and pressing discussion. Today, democracy faces unprecedented challenges, from growing autocratization worldwide to direct military aggression against democratic nations. These issues force us to rethink the resilience and future of democratic values, both in Europe and globally. And we are privileged to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Daniel Silander from Linnaeus University in Sweden. He is Associate Professor of Political Sciences and Research Leader of European Studies at Linnaeus University. And he is leader and coordinator of the international project EDC, Education for Democratic Citizenship, which conducted in cooperation between European countries and led by Swedish University and Financial Support Swedish Institute, also in cooperation with Murcia University, Jagiellonian University in Poland, and a lot of colleagues in Ukraine, Kiev Taras Shevchenko University, Institute of Social and Political Psychology, Dragomanov University, etc. So, and Daniel Silander brings extensive expertise in democratization, European integration and European values, and political developments in Europe and beyond. So, his lecture will explore how democracy is under threat globally, the impact of autocratization on international and general stability, and what this means for the future of Europe. With democracy at a critical crossroads, this discussion could not be more relevant. So, I think we can start, and Daniel can make his presentation, and probably you will explain the rules. Will we ask after or during your presentation? You're welcome. Let's start.
Okay, let me see. Thank you very much, Irina. I try to talk and share my presentation at the same time. That's too much for me. Thank you very much. Very nice introduction, and thank you for welcoming me. It's an honor to be here, of course, and the topic is sadly very contemporary. I wish I had a better topic, a more optimistic topic than I do have today, but that's how life is. Thanks to the audience for being here Friday afternoon, almost Friday evening in Ukraine. That's impressive to see the list of participants here. I hope you can see my slide now. Can you do that?
Yes. Yeah, it works.
Okay, great. I have a few slides, or even more than a few slides, and I will go through them and talk about them, and then we can have an open discussion and a lengthy discussion afterwards, and perhaps being more practical oriented, looking at where we are in European politics today when it comes to democracy, autocratization, and security. Just to be clear on one thing, I'm not a politician, not in Sweden, not within the European Union or elsewhere. So I am, as Irina presented me as, I'm a political scientist at Linnaeus University, southern part of Sweden, where I'm leading research on European studies. So I don't have any political arguments to come with today. What I'm going to do is to try to summarize the state of the art on research on autocratization and democratization. That's my job today, so to speak. Please make notes, and I hope you have a lot of questions on my slides and my discussion, and we can have them afterwards. The topic for today is the global threat to democracy, autocratization, and war. And about 35 years ago, I was in the Swedish system of gymnasium. Then it was like a very optimistic context. The zeitgeist in Europe was democratization, European integration, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the transitions, or at least at the beginning, the liberalization within what we said Eastern European countries that later on led into transitions into electoral democracies, and even later on in the perhaps late 1990s, ended up in more or less consolidated democracies, more or less all over Europe, except from Belarus and a few more states, perhaps. So when I entered the PhD program in Sweden in 2000, I was very much into democratization. You see the arrow here on top of the screen. And democratization, there was like a mushroom of studies on democratization. How can the world democratize? Why do we see democratization around the world? And democratization seemed to be such a strong power that it led into geographical, cultural, and religious areas that had not seen democratization before. Perhaps the region that was the exception was the Middle East, but Africa saw democratization, Latin America saw democratization, and as I said, Eastern Europe saw democratization, etc., etc. So most of the studies when I entered the PhD program was about how can we understand the positive trend of democratization. What were the driving engines behind authoritarian states collapsing in favor of electoral democracy and later on consolidated liberal democracies? Today, as you can see in the bottom arrow here, we have most of the research have shifted from explaining democratization to trying to understand and explain why do we see autocratization around the world. That's much more pessimistic because autocratization means less freedoms, less political rights, less civil liberties for the people, less checks and balances, less justice, less civil society mobilization, civil society participation, etc. So the research area that I come from have totally shifted from being very optimistic, explaining the escalation of, and the expansion of freedoms around the world, to being more pessimistic today and trying to explain why democratization has not only halted around the world, but also how we see many democracies being challenged from within, and authoritarian states being even more authoritarian against its own people and neighboring states. This is kind of a good overview what the research on democratization versus autocratization is all about, where we have democracy. In simple terms, it could be an electoral democracy where you have free and fair elections every 4, 5, or 6 years, or even a more established democracy, a liberal democracy, where you see not only the political rights surrounding elections or political rights within the political system, but also civil liberties in the society at large, beyond the political system. So democratization is far gone when we can say that a state is a liberal democracy. It's quite far gone when it's an electoral democracy. It's not far gone, of course, when we see an electoral autocracy or a closed autocracy. Today, we can say that autocratization happens both within democracies, both within a liberal democracy and electoral democracy, as well as autocratization happens within autocracies, electoral autocracies and closed autocracies. So autocratization is from within very closed political systems to very open political system. That is the definition of autocratization. What we know from previous research is that there are certain driving engines that push for democracy, both within authoritarian states, autocracies, and within fragile electoral democracies to become more established, consolidated liberal democracies. And the state of art, and I might miss out the driving engine 1 or 2 here, but overall you can see from the 1950s when Seymour Martin Lipset wrote a piece in an article, I think it was 1959, arguing for economic development. Since 1950s, 60s, you can see that research have identified, at least in my case here, 9 driving engines that are super important for democracies to survive and for authoritarian states to collapse in favor of democratization and establishing an electoral or liberal democracy. And what research can say is that a state that has a democratic legacy, a democratic history, a democratic tradition, that is a driving engine for democratization here and now. If you do have very limited or non-democratic legacy, that is an hindrance for democratization. That doesn't mean that it's absolutely impossible to democratize. Of course not. But then you lack an important driving engine. The other one comes from Samuel P. Huntington from 1968, I believe, Political Order in Changing Societies, a very interesting textbook. He said that it's important to have a state with institutions. It's much easier to democratize any state in the world if it has functional institutions. They might be authoritarian in nature, institutions, but at least you have a setup of institutions that you can democratize in comparison to a new state that have no institutions before or have had very, very dysfunctional institutions that have not been having no authority over the geographical area or no authority over a group of citizens, so to speak. So institutions, authoritarian or not, is another driving engine for setting up a democratization process. A third important driving engine for democratization, and that comes from the 1980s, De Palma and Juan Linz and Alfred Stefan and many others. They talked about an actor-oriented regime change. They said that sometimes we misinterpret authoritarian states and believe that they are very homogeneous in the power center. That even, let's say, Putin is a strong leader in Moscow. There are always fractions of other politicians that do question the strong leader, making him not as strong as he wants to be. So authoritarian divisions where you have one ruling elite, but within the elite, you have different opinions on the future of a country, or the importance of adhering to norms and values that seems to be attractive in the region and around the world, or domestic pressure. It's good for democratization to have that division within the authoritarian elite, the authoritarian power center. Then, as I said, economic development is a boost. It's helping out to democratize a country. But more recent research and more recent, I'll say from the 1990s, 2000 and onward, also include the social dimension, education, social welfare. It's no longer only about industrialization over modernization school, as we referred to in the, I think, 60s, 70s, and perhaps early 80s. It's about the distribution of welfare. If you have economic growth and you distribute the growth, the wealth, to large proportion of the people, that is also a driving engine for democracy. Some scholars already in the 70s and 80s talked about the growing middle class. Some scholars talked about the growing working class as pro-democratic. Some said more educated university students, that's a driving engine for democracy. So different scholars pinpoint different domestic actors as important for democratization. But overall, social and economic development is usually a driving engine also for democratization. And the fifth one that is closely connected to a dynamic social and economic society is the civil society. If you have engaged people that are engaged in the chess club, to the Red Cross, to Amnesty International, to any socially concerned network, organization, or association, that is also good for democratization. The more people are engaged in society, the more they, on an individual level, they empower themselves, they get enlightened, they learn about the wrongdoings from a regime, they learn about that change could happen, they learn about surrounding states that might have different systems, and they can adapt to that and adopt and try to aggregate more pro-democratic norms and values within their own society. And of course, the more pluralistic society you have with civil society organizations and associations, the less it becomes tougher for the repressive regime to control the society, control the organizations, what they do, their members, what they want, their agendas, and how they conduct their civil society businesses, so to say. I'm running through them a little bit. Please make notes if you have any questions or comments. Then we go over to the more not domestic factors, not domestic driving engines. We talk about diffusion. That's what we saw in the former Czechoslovakia in the 80s and 90s, in Poland and Hungary, where you could see that when one state do democratize, it might have a demonstration effect on at least surrounding states, geographically and politically surrounding states. They send a message to neighboring states that this could also happen in your states. Diffusion agents, transnational actors that are perhaps very strong in the 1980s in Poland, like the Solidarity movement, could also diffuse their ideas to the working class and trade unions, etc., and the middle class in Hungary, and then you can have a demonstration effect, like a snowballing effect. You start to roll the small snowball, and it attach more and more snow, and the demonstration effect becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. A second driving engine from more international perspective is, of course, democratic aid. If you can make sure that it doesn't go into corruption, which is a global challenge today with all kinds of democratic aid, a huge debate in Sweden how we organize our democratic aid so it actually reaches out to pro-democratic actors within number 5 up here, for instance, the civil society. As an example, I know that the Swedish democratic aid, the Swedish foreign aid today is redirected in when it comes to, example, Georgia. Because of a new government, most aid, or almost all democratic aid, will go to the civil society, to NGOs within Georgia, the civil society organizations, to try to push for change within the government. So less aid is going to the government because the Swedish government is not pleased with the political changes and anti-democratic changes in the country as it is today. Number 8, global democratic leadership. There are plenty of studies made saying that when the US got involved in Iraq with that disaster politically, the legitimacy for the US at the time, early 2000 or so, the legitimacy decreased for American leadership in the world. And after that, there has not really been any strong American president with strong legitimacy within US with their own voters to actually have a strong global voice on democracy around the world. And in Europe, we talk today, due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, about seeking a strong European democratic leadership, having one spokesperson that speaks out on democracy, on behalf of Ukrainian freedom. And we're still discussing who that is. Is it the Commission, or is it the leader in Germany, in France, or the UK? But global democratic leadership has been missing, according to most research, over the last 2 decades. And it's very important to have that kind of leader speaking out on human rights abuses, speaking out on undemocratic measurements against people, citizens around the world. And the final is also debated today in European politics. The European Union and the European states have for many, many, many decades been a very strong soft power, using diplomacy, using its economic union, using aid, technology, the Eastern Partnership towards what we say Eastern Europe, etc., including Ukraine. That has been a strong mechanism. But today we can see that soft power is not enough. So that's why we have a debate among European and EU member states today that we need to spend more money on military weapons, because we seem to be back in an era of growing geopolitics. It's not good enough to be a soft union with integration among the EU member states, having excellent policies on climate change, free trade, etc., if the world that surrounds the European Union speaks in geopolitical terms. And that's what we see today. So standing on both, like a hybrid version of in foreign policy making, having both soft and hard power seems to be very, very important, because today, this day, and the next week, I would say, hard power seems to be the most efficient tool, unfortunately. I skipped this one. If we then know that these 9 driving engines are important to understand why states in the world democratize or not, if many of those 9 driving engines are available within a country, it's likely that that country will democratize, or if it's already is in a democracy, it's likely that it will become a more consolidated, deepened, stable democracy. If they're not there, it's less likely to see a democratization process. If we use the freedom of the world, for those of you that are into this field of democratization and autocratization, there are new reports coming out right now from VDEM at Gothenburg University, Freedom in the World, Freedom House in New York, The Economist Intelligence Unit. They have not really yet presented information about their maps and tables and the results. They are working on it now, but some are already out. And I found this on Freedom of the World. For teachers in the university life, in political science at least, they tend to use Freedom of the World just to show students in a simple way how we can view the world. And the green countries, according to this independent think tank in New York, Freedom House and Freedom of the World 2025, they say that the green countries in the world right now are democratized, more or less democratized. The yellowish, brown, yellow here are in between. They are hybrid regimes. They could have elections, free and fair elections, but in between the elections, there are hindrances to fulfill democratic criteria. It could be that there are censorship in media. It could be that the elected government is very harsh and repressive against civil society. The press is not free to speak or write whatever they want to say. Political opponents are harassed, but then they have free and fair elections again. That could be one hybrid version. And the rest of the countries here, as you see, are the authoritarian states in the world. That is, you could see that there are a lot of authoritarian states compared to the green ones that are more democratic states. And then we have some brown, yellow countries having both authoritarian and democratic states. The problem with the Freedom of the World map, as you can see here, is it doesn't say, it say that the US, for example, is a democracy. And we know the many challenges within US democracy today. So you can question the green color in many of the green countries. We see a lot of polarization, fragmentation, xenophobic right radical parties in Europe today that in some cases do have an anti-democratic agenda. They're not just anti the European Union or anti the government at home. They are also trying to lead the population into an authoritarian government if they would win the free and fair election. So the green countries are not as good as Freedom House here says, but compared to the other countries in the world, they do categorize the 195 states or so into 3 groups. And then the Greens have more political rights and more civil liberties than the rest of the countries in the world. What Freedom House also do, however, is to say that they try to, and this is from VDEM as well, they try to not just say that some countries are free, fully democratized. Here they say that, for instance, again, that Australia is dark blue, meaning that it is a fully consolidated democracy. But you see that the US in this map is light blue. So if you use a methodology and you have indicators that are a little bit finer and more concrete and more detailed, the indicators say that behind the green democracies of the world, you have some dark blue, fully democracies, and more light blue or white blue, less democracies. And that says something more about how the world is organized today. They also do the same thing with the authoritarian states, that the brownish, dark red, whatever we call it, are more authoritarian than the color red countries here. And the light red is less authoritarian, although being authoritarian. So instead of only having 3 categories of states around the world, green, brown, purple, here you see different dimensions. Like the green here is dark blue, fully democratized, light blue, and white blue. So 3 different categories within democracies. saying that you can be more or less a democracy. And Sweden here, as you can see up in the north of Europe, is dark blue, fully democratized. The US less blue and less democratized. Another interesting index is the Economics Intelligence Unit. They do the same thing as basically as Freedom House and the Dem Institute in Gothenburg University. But they talk about authoritarian states, they talk about hybrid regimes, they talk about flawed democracies and full democracies. This also provides viewers a more exact idea or exact picture of how the world is organized today. Where flawed democracies do have free and fair elections, but they are flawed because they have serious problems at home. It could be that all groups, minority groups, do not have the same rights as the majority. It could be, as I said before, censorship in media. It could be some harassment of political opponents. It could be registrations or restrictions from the government, making the civil society not as open, as free as it should be in a full democracy. Then you also see different colors on different countries. And then, unfortunately, we can see that the dark blue countries, the fully democratized countries in the world, are very few. And you can see that even Europe, which is the most democratized geographical region in the world without any competition, are not full democracies within the European Union. There are some states, according to this index, saying that they can do better, they can improve their democracy, they are flawed democracies. Let's see if I get on there. If you look at the map down under, this is talking about autocratization and democratization. And then you can see that many states in the world changing freedom scores. This is VDEM Institute again at Gothenburg University in Sweden. I think it's perhaps the index that is mostly used in political science around the world today, even more used than Freedom House because it's more nuanced, have better methodology. Here you could see that this was from 2022 to 2023. So it's not today, but it's 2 years back, 1.5 years back. You can see that the VDEM Institute in their survey say that many states around the world are in a process of autocratization. The more red, the stronger autocratization process you're in. And light red, as Sweden, according to VDEM, is also in an autocratization process. And this is the alarming signal in contemporary politics today, that we see autocratization also in some of the most democratized countries around the world. We do see autocratization within one of the most authoritarian states in the world, like China and Russia. They are becoming more and more and more repressive against their citizens than they were 10 years ago. They're in an autocratization process. But the additional problem is that you also see autocratization within democracies and within full democracies or consolidated democracies. I'm quite sure, I haven't seen the map, because I do think Freedom House and VDEM are developing these maps right now, because I know they have collected data over the last months. I'm quite sure that the US will not be brown, meaning zero change in autocratization. I'm quite sure with Trump as president and with all the things that have happened to rule of law, etc., in media, censorship, etc., that there will be light red or dark red in the US when it comes to autocratization process. And that is the challenge. Autocratization, as I started with, is not a process of less freedom within authoritarian state. It's also about less political rights, less freedoms, less civil liberties within democracies. Here we can just, to show you in a simple way, number of countries democratizing. If we go back 22 years, we had 35 countries in blue, 10 democratizing. 20 years later, in 2023, they were 18 countries. Number of countries autocratization, then the circle is bigger, 42 countries 2 years ago, and it was less 20 years ago or 22 years ago, 11 countries. And this is just numbers, but they do show you that the number of states democratizing 2023 compared to 2003 are less, and the number of autocratization countries in 2023 compared to 2003 are growing significantly. And that is numbers, but they show that countries among the 195 states in the world, there is a huge increase of autocratizing countries around the world. And that is a global phenomenon. It's not, unfortunately, just in one region or so. And of course, this have an impact on world population living in democracies or autocracies. In 2003, you could say that almost half, or about half, 50% of the world population lived in a democracy. 2 years ago, the number was 71% living in autocracies, in authoritarian states. Changes in many states have led to the world population living without or with very limited rights and liberties are growing. And share of world population living in autocratizing countries, 7% 2003, 35% in 2023. And this number has not decreased over the last 2 years. VDEM said in their newest report that it came out just a few weeks ago that we have seen 19 years in a row of autocratization. So this is not a recent phenomenon that the world is going backward. We talked about democratic sliding 10 years ago, but the democratic sliding has actually developed into autocratization. 19 years in a row, we see that the number of that the autocratization continues, and the number of states autocratization outnumbers the ones going in a democratic direction. And you can see the turning point, I think. Here we see, if you can see, is in 2008, we had 60 countries going into autocratization and 38 in democratization. 59, 43, 59, 56. So we have to go back to 2005 to actually see a positive view with a growing number of growing freedom around the world. So 2005, so it's almost 20 years, 19 years according to VDEM. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay. I skipped a few ones so we can just have a good discussion afterward, because this is on Zoom, so I don't want to make you too tired. Again, I couldn't find the updated data from 2025 because I think the institutes around the world of indexes are on the development. But here you could see in 2023, measuring states around the world in 2022, the top 10 standalone autocratizers, those 10 states that have seen the most dramatic decrease of freedoms at home. And from a European perspective, since we are European countries, Sweden and Ukraine, we could see that autocratization does not happen somewhere in the world far away from us. Let's talk about Nicaragua, Afghanistan with the Taliban regime, Hong Kong, India, for instance. It happened in Europe. And the most dramatic thing is that we see autocratization within European Union member states. Since this index was developed, we have seen a change of government in Poland. So I would say in the latest index that is not out yet, I think, Poland will have an improvement. But I don't think Hungary would have an improvement. That would be going downhill still when it comes to the liberal democracy index. So we have autocratizing countries within the European Union to such extent that we do see political science institutes today saying that the European Union is founded on the idea of having democratic member states. But they point out Hungary as a competitive authoritarian state. And if we believe in that index, and again, I'm referring to VDEM at Gothenburg University, if we believe in that, the European Union has, for the first time ever, an authoritarian state and a competitive authoritarian state as one of the core EU member states. You could also see the worst of the worst of the 67 countries and territories designated as not free, the following 17 have the worst aggregate scores for political rights and civil liberties. And I don't think there are any surprises here. These are the worst of the worst. So here is not Hungary. They are one of the most autocratizing states in the world, but they're not worst of the worst. But you do have North Korea. Syria is under governmental change. Let's see what happens there. We have the Taliban regime again in Afghanistan. We have a military dictatorship in Myanmar. We have Lukashenko in Belarus, which has always been more or less since the late 1990s an authoritarian leader. And we have the Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine, of course, here as well. These are the worst of the worst. If we then look at what should we look for if we are afraid of autocratization? What are the signs that a state is in a negative process of seeing less freedoms, political rights, and civil liberties, and more repressiveness? Then research seems to say that governmental censorship efforts, media, is one of the first indicators that a country is in the wrong process, in a negative process, in an anti-democratic process. When a government, elected or not, go after media and tells media what to say and not say, and make fun of media and try to censor media or lock out media from the press room, etc. That is a strong indicator of that the country is in an autocratization process. And for us here in this Zoom room, freedom of academic and cultural expression is the second one. States around the world that are turning into becoming more repressive seems to go after universities and higher education institutions in general. They know that academics are critical minded. They know that we deal with facts. They know that we are outspoken in teaching or in writing research wise. So universities is a danger for repressive governments. And you see around the world how departments, topics are forbidden. Some literature are not listed anymore because they are said to be biased because they are not pleasing the government. And you see that in democratic countries. You have seen that in Hungary. You have seen strong discussions in the US today about what we as university staff should not teach and research about, what are political correct areas and subdiscipline or not. And you also see that, of course, in the most authoritarian states in the world, less freedoms for universities. Again, Myanmar, North Korea, of course, China, and Russia, etc. And this is one of the reasons why the Swedish government, in alliance with the European Union, stopped all university cooperation with Russian universities. It was the first time ever that the Swedish government, due to the war on Ukraine, said that no universities in Sweden will deal with any Russian universities. And it was not to punish university members, researchers, teachers, but it was to show us, send a signal to Kremlin, to Moscow, that we are against the authoritarianism in Moscow and we are against the war in Ukraine, and also that the Swedish universities and the Swedish government are very afraid that we do not cooperate with free academic institutions anymore under the Russian government, that they are manipulated and controlled by Moscow and not teaching in a correct academic way and not presenting research in a correct academic way. Let me see what time it is. Please let me have 5 more minutes. I promise to stop there.
Yeah, it's okay. You can continue.
Okay, thank you very much. Stop
just
Marina
now.
If I talk too much.
Yeah, it's 5:45 now. Just now, but you can continue.
Just a few more minutes. Okay, thank you. I'll skip a few ones so we can come back to these and we can discuss it in 4 or 5 minutes. I saw that my colleague from Murcia is here, so I should invite her to say something, Irene, but I can't do that now. This is interesting as well, and this is also negative because there seems to be a growing public dissatisfaction with democracy within democracies. And that is a problem. And that is also part of the growing autocratization around the world. As it says here, while most people prefer democracy as a system and they believe in democratic values, they're increasingly frustrated with how it functions in practice. This dissatisfaction seems to have three main causes: declining trust in government, the failure of politicians and political parties to represent the voters effectively, and a civic and representation deficit. I do right now a project on democracy in South Africa. As you know, ANC, the government, has been in power since 1994 after the apartheid, unjust system, racist system stopped. The problem today with South Africans is that the growing number of dissatisfied Democrats are growing. They don't see how the government perform as they should. They are not able to handle the social and economic injustices that are still there in post-apartheid South Africa. So there is a growing frustration, and the growing frustration is becoming violent. You see a lot of social riots on the streets in some of the most socio-economic unjust cities in South Africa. And also some are in indexes turning their backs on democracy, saying that they want another type of government because they are fed up with a democracy that do not deliver on their social and economic needs. And that is, I think South Africa is very dramatic, but you can see that also in these states that are in this index in front of you, which is Canada, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Japan, and including Sweden, that Democrats are becoming to a higher degree dissatisfied today, leading to, I guess, polarization, frustration, anti-radical, anti-democratic parties, radical parties, both on the left wing in a traditional dimension and right wing, etc. So that is a major concern within democracies. Let's make 3 more slides. What impact does this have on stability then, and conflict and war? I would say that research is kind of it's very clear on one thing, that democracies have a lot of fallacies, weaknesses, but there is no real political stability if the government is not based on the people. There is no long-term sustainable legitimacy in any political system if the people, the citizens, are not asked about their political views, their political agendas, their political opinions. So even if democracies and the representative democracy today is questioned by dissatisfied Democrats, we don't see an alternative system that is close to being as good as democracies. So internal stability is important. Democracy is important for internal stability. And that is why the United Nations set out goal 16, stable democratic institutions, because they know that democratic governments are much better to promote stability at home than authoritarian states. Authoritarian states survive because they repress their people, not because they have any legitimacy among the people. And the second thing that is important with democracies is that research still relates to the democratic peace theory from the late 18th century. Immanuel Kant's idea that the more countries that have democracy, transparent institutions, popular legitimate governments, the less war between states. And it still is relevant. We see very few, if any, examples around the world where fully fledged democracies are actually engaging war towards another fully fledged democracy. So within the European Union, the strength of European integration, the strength of the European Union over the last 50, 60 years has been that they are democracies, opening up borders for trade and integration. So that is the less free world we see with the ongoing autocratization. Unfortunately, I think we will also see more violence within states, but also between states. So that's another concern that we should have when we see democracies being hollowed out or questioned at home, and we see authoritarian states being more and more internationally active. Less freedom within states and among states in the world will lead to more violence. Two slides here, you could say that I just found this on Freedom House. It's just interesting that there's a dark blue here that is indicating a democracy. You could see that, I don't see the timeline here, 73 to 2023. You could see that many European states have a long legacy of being democracies. And this has been the cornerstone of European Union and European integration, that they speak the same language. We have differences, absolutely, among the EU member states, but they share at least democratic norms and values, and they have the same perception on how politics should be conducted when it comes to institutions, checks and balances, anti-corruption, treating minorities in the correct way, etc. If we compare that to my absolute last slide, this one, and we look at Russia down here, we see a very dark red, a history of authoritarian, closed authoritarian system, a little bit less closed authoritarian system during some years, but still continued to be an authoritarian state. And I would say, and I don't want to simplify European politics today because it's super complicated, as you all know, but there are two different world views on how world politics and European politics should be conducted. And today you have a constitutional democratic order among European Union that says no thank you to geopolitics, and say yes to trade agreements, integration, and an open economic market, open university collaboration, and democratic governance. And then you have a Russia that is continuing to argue in favor of geopolitics based on being an authoritarian state where might and power matters more than economic integration, more collaboration. So we do have two different perspectives in European politics today that clashes fundamentally. And in between is Ukraine, of course, where the European and the EU order is that all states are sovereign. It's stated in the United Nations Charter. It's no question about it. All states develop their own political and economic future based on the people's will. And then you have a Russia that sees the world in geopolitical terms, creating buffer zones to protect and promote Russian interests. It was in the 1990s where Russia said that surrounding states were near abroad, and we see the same perception today. Russia do not see many states surrounding Russia as sovereign states, as the EU do, as the United Nations Charter does. They see it as buffer states or a near abroad that they should control, influence, destabilize, just to benefit Russian national interest. And those two perspectives are not going along at all. So I stopped there. I talked too much. Sorry, guys. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So
I stopped sharing.
Yeah, you can stop. Probably some of our guests, participants have some questions. I see some comments in our chat. It's from Maxim Chebatarov. So it kind of implies that full democracies are flawless. Yeah, it's probably more like a comment. Yeah. Growing economic.
I could expand on this.
Please.
But first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was quite interesting, even though it's my master's degree, and all this democracy backsliding talk has been around for a while already. I basically have two questions or comments, if you will. The first one is that, there are different gauges and metrics and institutions measuring all this democratization and autocratization, and kind of, could be interesting, but the more interesting question is where is it all going? Would be interesting to hear your take on the kind of overall pattern. If you look at this from what they call longue durée in history, because well, it's okay. You know, we can say that EU has a long tradition of democracy, going back maybe 50 years based on your slide. I mean, if we're looking at post World War II period, but then we can also say that Europe was, you know, during that period in a very kind of special environment in terms of Euro-Atlantic protection and in terms of, you know, kind of being traumatized by the war and trying to prevent another one, and going, you know, kind of uniting around this idea of having an economic / political union to prevent that. So maybe I mean, it was different from the more natural environment where the rest of the world was living. What do you think about this? And basically that's, yeah, two questions. Your vision of where this all is going, are we just going through a cycle and it's gonna come back, or is it just irretrievable and all democracies start sliding into some kind of autocracies because this is the major flaw that democracies have, you know? I mean, people vote for simple solutions, they elect populists, and populists become autocrats, and this is how it dies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two very good questions, not easy to answer. I think I would say we go in cycles. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the 1990s with Francis Fukuyama and Samuel P. Huntington and others saying that this is the end of history. Now, finally, we have realized that there is no alternative political system to democracies. So we won, basically. And 20 years later, 25 years later, we see these strong tendencies, a negative tendency of authoritarianism and autocratization. So I think absolutely that I don't think this is the downhill for democracies. It all depends on what happens with Russia, of course, and how democracies behave towards Russia and other authoritarian threats. But it also it's not that simple. It's not simple. But it's not just pointing out to authoritarian states and deal with them in a clever way to survive as a democracy. Democracies do have, they're not flawless, to answer another question here. They do have a lot of problems at home with the growing number of dissatisfied Democrats and with the growing number of radical parties on the right and left side, both questioning the European Union and questioning at sometimes democracy and democratic governance. So it's a two arenas to fight the battle, to protect and promote the democracy, both against active authoritarian states that could invade you if you don't stop them, or hybrid warfare every day, basically, and also within, among dissatisfied Democrats that can turn into being anti-democratic if governments do not improve themselves and handles the realities for citizens. And it's not just as in Sweden, we have a huge growing problem with unemployment, high unemployment rate for immigrants. It's dissatisfied. They are marginalized and excluded basically from Swedish democracy to a large extent. But you also see people born in Sweden becoming more and more dissatisfied. So it's a two-stage or two arena battles that you have to fight and win. And you are absolutely right with the specific position for the European Union member states. They have a lot of things to thank the US for, because if you remember Robert Kagan's book in the early 2000s of Paradise and Power, he said the reason why the European Union member states has been able to develop a welfare system, a transparent democracy, is because the US has always covered them militarily with US tax money protecting European safety. So the European tax money could be directed to education, welfare, the school system, etc., infrastructure, etc. And those days are over now. And I think that is a reality check for the Europeans, that with President Trump, that we can't assume that American soldiers will be there to fight for us against any enemy close to us, and it will cost a lot of money. So the growing democracy within the European Union member states is absolutely related to the US protecting European interests, and we could use the money to social welfare, etc.
Okay, thank you. So, do you have any question? Probably I will ask my. So, Maxim, would you like to say some? Thanks. Okay.
Yeah, I have a very small, relatively small question, but I don't want to steal this show. But maybe, I mean, my question is basically, you mentioned both Fukuyama and Huntington in your presentation, and I've been lately getting in my inbox all these articles from foreign policy and you name it, that now Fukuyama's prophecy is now fully dead, and Huntington was ahead of his time, so it wasn't really too cynical, too brutal to propose this civilizational theory, and we kind of we are watching this materializing now in front of our eyes. And I mean, what do you think about this? And where does this put us in terms of prospects for kind of global democratization? Because if we're going back to this civilizational paradigm, it would logically mean that we should just leave some civilizations alone for them to develop in their own ways, rather than trying to kind of impose some Western values and views, if you
will. Very good comment. Thank you. I think that is a strong debate within many African states, that they want to develop their own democracies with African characteristics. They are fed up with colonialism and Western ambitions to promote, from an African perspective, our or their Western democracy in African states. I just take Africa as not a civilization, but as you know, as a geographical and region here, political region. The problem with many African states is that they are today strongly influenced by Chinese investments and Russian investments. And I talked about Kenya and talk about South Africa, that I have been working with university scholars there, and they pinpoint that the strong feeling of saying no to Western democracy and Western interference have opened up for Chinese interference and Russian interference, and that doesn't come with any kind of pro-democratic norms and values. So that is, I think, a major concern for their sustainable democracy in the future, that they are linking up with two strong authoritarian states and becoming very financially and economically dependent on these states in their infrastructure, in their political decisions. I'm not sure if that is an answer to your question. I'm not sure about the Western values. Of course, the European Union is a Western organization with norms and values that are westernized, but I'm not sure how they, if we read the European Union treaties and we look into what the European Union treaty says about what is a democracy, I'm not sure if that goes against anything that is said in the UN Charter or any human rights commissions organized by the United Nations. I don't see why free and fair elections is westernized, and I don't see why multi-political party system is westernized. I don't see why anti-corruption measurements, which is important, is westernized. I don't see a dynamic free civil society with free organization, associations, and the right to organize demonstrations. Why would that be westernized? I think that is universal norms. But yeah, just my thinking out loud.
Yeah, we have comment and question from Oleg in chat. You can read, or Oleg, probably you say how to do it better, Daniel.
Okay. Nice to meet you, Daniel. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for interesting lecture. Maybe you remember last year, my colleague Alexandra and I visited Linnaeus University, a EUniWell project. During this visit, we had a short meeting with you and your colleague John. When you told us about the idea of this project, and I am very glad that this project has been implemented. My questions. What is your forecast for the development of the situation with democracy in the world, and what can be done to save democracy, democratic world?
Please say the first question again.
What is your forecast for the development of the situation in the world?
Okay, thank you. Good to see you. Thank you for introducing me. I do recognize now. It's always hard on Zoom, so it's very nice to see you again. And I'm also happy that
the world is very close.
Sorry?
The world is very close. A lot of friends around the world.
It is. We had a great meeting in Kalmar campus by the Baltic Sea in Sweden. Yes, it was very nice. Good to see you. And thanks for asking this question. I think it's impossible, and I think we all say that to our students. Don't try to predict or foresee the future, because we don't have any good methodology. But the only thing I can say that I don't think it's all, I repeat myself, we need to handle the major internal challenge within many democracies with a growing number of dissatisfied Democrats. Because if Democrats that are pro-democratic in norms and values do not find it relevant to go and vote or express their opinion anymore, because the politicians are not doing anything anyway, then we do have a huge challenge for a democracy. So I think politicians and governments needs to listen in much more to their people and actually try to target the reality that people see. We have had, again, a huge problem in Sweden where we have different kinds of government saying the right things, but not acting on those things. And they're not really understanding the challenges for minorities and for poor people, for uneducated people, for people in rural areas. They're speaking out on behalf of quite wealthy citizens in Stockholm, and not on the countryside, and not with other ethnic background or national background. I think that's super important. But I don't see any alternative to democracy. Democracy is not one model. It needs to refresh itself. It needs to adapt to new young generations, new challenges in the society, new realities. So it's always evolving. It's not an end station to be a democracy. And that's will always be a tricky fight. But I don't see in history or today any relevant alternative political system to any kind of democracy, whatever we embed in democracy. It's no functional system out there that I'm jealous at, and I would say, oh, I would love to live under that government instead of my own democratic government. So that is the best scenario I can say or see.
Thank you. So Daniel, I have a question as well. So it's mostly focused on our situation, but generally, a lot of authoritarian leaders justify restrictions on freedoms as necessary tools tools for national security during the wartime or extreme time terrorism, or for example, in COVID time as well. And how can democracy effectively counter this narrative without compromising security? Probably, do you know some successful examples when we can use democratic values to become stronger in extreme situation, for example, in conditions of the war? Or we have to be more autocratized, and it will do us stronger, and it will be more helpful for us. What do you think?
Very good question, and very hard question to answer. I take my own country as a case again. We see, if you are familiar with Barry Busan of the Copenhagen School from 1990s and early 2000s, they talked about securitization within democracies, and where new political issues, new political areas were securitized. Climate change, I think, is a good securitization because without a good climate, we will not survive as people. But in Sweden, we see today securitization when it comes to migrants. Anyone coming from non-EU member states or non-European states is a potential security risk, according to our security agents and the Swedish police and the Swedish National Police Force and the military. And that is a bad securitization because we point out migrants, immigrants as a threat to national security. And that's just politics. We see the same thing in academia today. We are told at Swedish University not to collaborate too much internationally with other universities because, according to our security agency in Stockholm, they say, we know that they are here to steal our knowledge, our technology, our innovations, our research, our teaching methods, etc., etc. And I think that must be a no-no in a democracy. The COVID-19 was similar. Sweden kept a very open society. That I know that my brother that lives in the US, they closed down all schools. They closed down all. In Spain, they had, I guess Irene has to correct me if I'm wrong, military on the streets. We need to be very careful when we limit freedoms, and we must ask our governments, why do we limit the freedoms now? Because if we start to open up for restrictions and regulations and laws telling people that your human rights are limited now because it's good for our national security, etc., I think that is going downhill. And it's so easy for a government or a leader to misuse that freedom they have as politicians. And in the long run, we end up in an autocratization process. And I think that is a no-no for me. Really question your government every time they want to make your democratic rights and liberties more shallow, and every time they use that this is for the national security interest, or because in my context here in Sweden, it's a dangerous process we have seen.
Thank you. And I had the question from our some of our listeners in chat. So the USA on the path of autocratization, and probably like addition from my side to this question, is usually we perceive the democracy in USA like the ideal model and the like example for us mostly, and like the model which is capable to self-renew. And what's happening now? Is it way to autocratization, or what's happening? What do you think in USA democracy? I mean,
in what country do you refer to, Irina?
What?
You say what happens now?
That's what's happened now was American democracy, because we perceived it like ideal model, but yes. It's not
no.
true. We see.
No.
It should be recovered or renewed, or what should be.
Yeah, I'm not professional or in any way in American politics, but Sweden is a very heavily Americanized country. I actually saw an index, I think it was 10 years ago, that we were the most Americanized people in the world. So we have always listened to U.S. politics and U.S. popular culture, how to dress, what songs to listen to, and what songs to sing, and what food to eat, etc., etc. I know that one of your students had asked the question before how we perceive what's going on in the world today. I would say that Swedes are today in a shock about the changes in U.S. democracy. Of course, Swedes overall would vote for Obama, Biden, Kamala Harris, the Democrat side. We have very few Republicans in Sweden because we do have another idea of welfare system than the Republicans in general have. We have believed in a strong state, not less Washington, D.C., just to compare in an easy way. But we are shocked, I think, because we didn't foresee the changes that have happened so fast within the Republican Party. Swedes have had problems with Republican politicians before because they have not shared the same values as we have in Sweden. But we have always listened to them and listened to the debate against Democrats and understood where they come from. But today, I think Swedes in general do not understand the Republican Party. That's one thing. And I think Swedes feel afraid of the individualization that had happened within the Republican Party, where one or a few politicians have so strong power within the party, and where the party seems to almost be demolished and led by a few people. And that is, from a Swedish perspective, not a healthy sign for democracy. A political party has its own checks and balances within the party over its own politicians, and it seems to be gone within the Republican Party. I think that is the general view in Sweden, and I think we share that with most Europeans. Dramatic change in the US, which have dramatic consequences for European stability, and of course, you know this better than I do, dramatic changes for Ukraine. That's for sure.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. So, Maxim?
Well, yes. Thank you. Now that you're talking about Sweden, and I like Sweden. I've been there many times, and it's kind of sad, reading all these articles lately on the growing crime rate and other problems. But my question, I'm basically going to act on my second comment in the chat regarding economic inequality as one of the factors, because a lot of people basically inequality is growing everywhere in the States in particular, and people kind of, that's one of the undelivered promises of democracy. Or maybe there was no promise at all, but people are not feeling happy that this gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots, is keeps growing regardless of any democratization. And maybe we know that Sweden is a kind of not showcase democracy, but it's more successful than others in this regard. Do you think that having a progressive tax system and spreading the wealth, and Sweden historically, has been called many times a socialist state, I'm sorry, it could kind of at least mitigate this important factor and delay this democratic backsliding in a way? I assume it's still the same, or more or less the same progressive taxation in Sweden, where you get taxed 100% after a certain level of income, right?
Yes, thank you. And then yes, the Swedish history, or the modern history, is that its politics has, as you say, been very, very strongly dominated by the Social Democratic Party. The Social Democratic Party has always been a very, very pro-democratic party. So it doesn't really have, well, it comes from socialism, but in the Swedish context, it has been a very pro-democratic party, fighting for poor people, fighting for the labor, the workers with trade unions and a dynamic civil society, and being very inclusive, striving for welfare for everyone. So that is why we have become so wealthy as we have, and have had equality in our past in Sweden. In the early 2000s, there was a change among Swedes that we found ourselves paying too much taxes. And it came with a debate that if we pay that high taxes as we do compared to many other states in the world, we should get more from it than we did. So the alliance, as it's called, a liberal right-wing government, changed the agenda a little bit and say, well, we don't pay more taxes from now on. We keep the same tax rate, or even they lower the tax rate. That doesn't mean that we have lowered the tax rate tremendously, but there was a change in the agenda that if you wanted to win the election, you couldn't say we will raise taxes anymore. There was a no-no among many Swedes. And I think that was because many Swedes felt that we paid so much, so now we should demand from the government to actually perform accordingly, because you do have our money to be able to perform education in the welfare system, etc. Let me see, what could I more say? So today we have inequalities, and very fast growing inequalities in Sweden. And I mentioned before, it's absolutely easy to see how the unemployment rate among immigrants are sky high compared to people born in Sweden, and especially if you come outside Europe. That comes with that we have received refugees coming from war-torn societies where they don't have any education whatsoever, or very low education. And of course, in a high-tech country as Sweden and most European countries are, it's extremely tough to get into the labor market if you don't have any education from your home country or any skills. We don't have the easy jobs anymore. We don't have the low-paid jobs because that's not part of the Swedish welfare system. So it's hard even to get a job at McDonald's, if you understand me. Because you need skills for that too, and there are so many young Swedes that are applying for them and summer jobs, etc. The problem is with Sweden is that we have been a very homogeneous country until the 1990s or so. Before that, we received people from Hungary and former Yugoslavia seeking jobs because we had a better labor market than they did. But they were skilled and had education, so they got a job immediately. With the more low-educated refugees that we have received, you can also see a growing hostility among Swedes. I'm not speaking out for every Swede now, but you can see that refugees has become an economic burden. And then you have populism, radicalization, and polarization in the Swedish society too. So it's easy for politicians and political parties to point out certain groups as problems or financial economic challenges, etc. And that's what we have seen today. So if I speak out freely now, we do have a right-wing party. They're not officially part of the government today, but they are supporting the government, and without their support, there would not be the government we have. So they are in a power position to put a lot of demands on the liberal right-wing government we have, and that have led up to less refugees, less immigration to Sweden, and a more polarized society. If we could solve that huge problem with higher taxes, I don't think so, but the problem has grown so fast. But we are a heterogeneous country, a heterogeneous population, with marginalized areas and marginalized groups, not only because of being refugee or migrant. We have other young people performing not very well in school, etc. But to make it easy, the refugees and migrants, the unemployment rate are sky high compared to Swedish-born people, which is a huge problem for cohesiveness and democracy.
So, thank you. So, dear colleagues, do you have any more questions? Or we will finish, I suppose. So, Daniel, thank you so much for your insightful presentation and for sharing the knowledge. I suppose a lot of seeds for thinking over and development of our thinking, and have some ideas for our project as well. And I truly appreciate the time and effort you put into our knowledge and our experience, and really appreciate with all participants who have time in the evening of Friday before the weekend and stay here. So thank you very much for your
experience. Thank you for the invitation. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks for participating. The Friday evening.
And it's like announcement for other participants that we will invite Daniel and Iran. Iran is also from she's colleague from our project EDC as well, and we invite them to participate in our conference, which will be conducted in November, I suppose, in the end of the year in political sciences. So, and Daniel and Iran will join us as well. we'll talk more about the democracy as well. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice weekend.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well,